Here's what the media isn't saying about the New Jersey drone sightings. In the last week, people across the East Coast, especially New Jersey, have been reporting seeing drones flying in the sky at night. No one knows who's flying them or what they're doing, but they've caused a kind of mass frenzy of speculation and fear. Politicians have been scrambling to get answers, and some politicians, most notably Donald Trump, have been calling on the military to shoot them out of the sky. New Jersey Congressman Jeff Van Drew even tried to float the idea that the drones were coming from an Iranian mothership off the eastern coast of the United States, a claim so outlandish that the Pentagon had to come out and dismiss it. But for all the non-stop talk of a foreign drone attack, no one's mentioning the fact that the United States military is actually the one quietly raising an army of autonomous killer robots. Autonomous killer robots, known by their more formal name as Lethal Autonomous Weapon Systems, or LAWS, are weapons that are able to identify, target, and engage enemies without any human involvement. You think about conventional drones, like the ones that are used in drone strikes overseas, the vehicle itself has no cockpit or any human operator. Instead, it's being operated remotely by a human pilot thousands of miles away who tells the vehicle where to fly and who to shoot. But autonomous weapons don't even need that. Autonomous weapons run on AI algorithms, which essentially gives them a mind of their own. You turn them on, and they go out and find and kill the enemy all on their own. You've actually probably seen autonomous weapons before in shows like Black Mirror without even knowing it. And despite dozens of Nobel laureates and over 30 countries calling for a global treaty to ban these weapons, the US not only opposes a treaty like this, but is actively stoking an arms race over this new technology. In 2023, the US Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, gave a speech to the National Defense Industrial Association, where she announced to a crowd of weapons manufacturing CEOs the new Replicator initiative, the Pentagon's new plan to deploy thousands of unmanned drones to multiple combat theaters in 18 to 24 months in an effort to give the US a military advantage over China. Her choice to unveil this new initiative at a weapons conference wasn't a coincidence. The Replicator initiative coincides with a new era of the Pentagon's alliance with private industry. Near the end of her talk, Kathleen Hicks appealed to the companies that aren't part of the traditional military-industrial complex to find their inner patriotism and help the Pentagon roll out this new plan. Quite frankly, she didn't even need to ask. Companies ranging from Amazon to Microsoft are lining up to create tech infrastructure for the Pentagon. The market for autonomous drones is expected to quadruple in the next decade. And even this weekend, during the Army-Navy game, while all this drone hysteria continued to rage, Palantir, the massive data giant, aired a commercial romanticizing this new technology with the tagline, "Battles are won before they begin. #ArmyNavy." The military-industrial complex is looking at this new arms race like one massive gold rush. To walk us through who the players are and just how dangerous these weapons can be, we spoke to Bill Hartung, a senior research fellow at the Quincy Institute who's been researching the arms industry and US military spending for decades.
The whole theory is you want to reduce what they call the kill chain, like the time between when you see the target and when you can destroy it. And if there's a race to see how short that can be, eventually it doesn't make sense to have humans in the loop because the other side will be faster if they just do it with robots essentially. So that's the concern, is that you're going to have these robotic wars which make war more likely because you're not losing as many troops, but also these things can malfunction because it's complex software. You could kill large numbers of people by mistake. If they were stupid enough to put it as part of the control system for nuclear weapons, you could have a disaster on that front. And also there's kind of this notion that this is some sort of technological miracle that's going to reestablish U.S. global dominance. And every generation they have a version of that. There was the electronic battlefield in Vietnam, which failed. There was Reagan's impenetrable Star Wars shield, which was penetrable. They had all these precision-guided munitions that were supposed to win the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's kind of a misunderstanding of the nature of warfare, because it's not just about, what kind of weapons you have. It's morale. It's a lot of these wars, the people that the U.S. is fighting are not going to give up ever, and so even though they suffer significant losses, at the end it's going to be a stalemate, or the U.S. is going to withdraw, essentially lose. It's kind of like baked into the ideology of Washington, partly because there's a lot of money to be made. some of the Silicon Valley leaders, like Palmer Luckey, who runs this firm Anduril, his initial pitch was he was going to save civilization by making cheaper weapons that would save the Pentagon money. At the same time, he was getting rich. And they write these manifestos about essentially saying like they're better people because they're the disruptors, they're the makers, and they can do things better than government. Some of them seem to think we don't need a government because you don't want to stand in the way of the smart, capable people, and government just gets in the way. So it's an extreme form of kind of libertarianism combined with almost like a messianic instinct. Like Peter Thiel of Palantir is obsessed with making himself live forever, and he's spending all this kind of money on it. They want to colonize space. So, people with these kind of like unrealistic visions of what's possible, I don't really want them like shaping our foreign policy.
Are mainly talking about like selling these weapons to the U.S. military, but you also foresee us, and do you think these companies also want to sell weapons to other actors potentially? Oh, absolutely.
They're building into their plans exports, and some elements are already happening. I mean, some of the AI-related surveillance stuff has been sold to Israel. Companies like Palantir, which are the cutting edge of this, emerging tech field, has an office in Israel. They're sort of viewing Israel and Ukraine as kind of test cases to show that their weapons work. That's sort of their advertising pitch is, oh yeah, look at what we've achieved. And of course in Gaza, Israel's committing war crimes against an adversary that doesn't have anti-aircraft or anything really to counter in the moment.
And then there's this other thing, the whole idea of a China threat.
But China, they don't really have the kind of military that you could use to project force to attack the United States, unless they wanted to start World War III, in which case they would also be devastated. They've built up, they want more regional capacity, but they're not going to try to do what the U.S. does. We have 800 military bases overseas. They have 3. We have 13 times as many nuclear weapons as they do. We have, 12 or 13 aircraft carriers. They have 2. So in a traditional contest, there's no comparison. Now, if it moves into, anti-satellite weapons and AI and swarms of drones, then it's sort of like you reset the clock, and you see, and they do have a very strong technological base. So it's like if they got pushed far enough, perhaps they would run an arms race with the U.S., but at the moment, that's not the case.
Do you see a threat of this technology being used domestically? I mean, you see all this repression happening against the students, all this police forces looking increasingly like a military. Like, do you see a threat of that?
Yeah. These companies are they're all sort of all-purpose purveyors of repression because they use their technology at the border. Palantir, sells things that are used for prescriptive policing, where they try to profile somebody and figure out if they're going to commit a crime. And it's been shown that these things have an incredible racial bias. So I think more so than with a company like Lockheed Martin, these companies they're very much able to build more sophisticated surveillance and tracking devices as well as weapons. So they're it's almost like the domestic repression and the war overseas is even more interlinked than it was, say, 10 years ago.
What do you think it'll take to sort of stand up to the power of the military-industrial complex?
Well, I think the one thing that could happen is that there's always talk of how we have to bring together all the different progressive movements and that they're too siloed. But this is sort of like a common enemy because they're militarizing the border, they're doing surveillance of activists, they're making war more likely overseas, they're lining their pockets. So I think it's possible that if people see all the problems with this direction, it could actually foster a more unified movement and a more unified pushback. If there's, I think, more of an understanding of what's at stake.